the most non-PC T-shirt here this morning.
Nigel Farage approved the I Love Oil and Gas T-shirt. Hundreds gathered to welcome him on Clacton Pier.
What could go wrong?
His message, you who support me are better people than others in society.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to be back here. They're not genuinely patriotic people. They don't believe in Britain and the British people the way you do. But am I right in thinking? Is this not the most patriotic town in the whole of our country?
A few opponents turned up too.
Go back to London! You're scum! Scum! Shame! You're scum!
Well, cheers, everybody. Cheers!
While Nigel Farage was repeating his message that Tories would be wiped out in the election, one right-wing Tory MP pleaded with him to stand down reform candidates where Tory allies like him were standing so they could team up after the election. If you want to remove even those with traditional Conservative views, there will be absolutely no coalition left to have in Parliament. If Farage wins and becomes an MP, they, Reform UK, will have no one to partner with.
I mean, this is a really, really unpleasant organisation that's out for itself, nobody else. Yes, there are a couple of dozen people in there who I do agree with on things, but sorry guys, you're in the wrong party.
As he left the pub, milkshake was thrown over the newly self-appointed Reform UK leader. It triggered what could be the first police arrest of the campaign. Nigel Farage polarising politics within hours of full re-entry and throwing the Conservatives' strategy into doubt.
The whole sort of point of this campaign was to squeeze those voters on the right, those voters who were voting reform by the Conservative Party. Now, actually, strategically, focusing on immigration was quite a sensible means of doing that. It makes sense from a political perspective. It's a #1 priority for Conservatives who've defected to reform. It's a big hesitation about Labour and Keir Starmer, what he would do on immigration. So there's a lot of political sense in the Tory focus on that so far. However, that has now changed because of this entry of Nigel Farage and reform into the race. Basically, anything the Conservatives say now on immigration, Nigel Farage can say, well, I'll do one better.
Sticking to the Tories' original campaign plan, the Home Secretary pledged, if re-elected, they would introduce a cap on work and family visas, which would go down every year of the next Parliament.
Immigration levels have been too high. We have taken action to bring them down, and we are committed to continue doing so. In stark contrast with the Labour Party.
They've now said they're going to have a visa cap. They've not said what the number is. They've got a visa cap without a cap. We did have a visa cap before. Rishi Sunak argued to get rid of it, which they did in 2020, and now they're going back to it but without a number. It is utter chaos.
Keir Starmer made a brief campaign appearance in Bolton. He was asked, where do you sleep when you're away?
Where do you sleep when you're away?
That's a very forward question. Everything is above board, and as it should be.
Both leaders generally kept away from the cameras, preparing in private for the first of 2 agreed head-to-head debates.
That first time that many people will actually see Keir Starmer for any more than sort of a 2-minute clip or 5 minutes, we still get people in focus groups who say they don't know who Keir Starmer is. So, you know, there is still a lot of people who are going to be tuning in for the first time. And also Rishi Sunak, he's found it hard to get his voice across over the last year or so. Everything they've tried in number 10 seems to have failed, and he's going to be hoping that he can connect with the public and show the sharp difference between the two.
The Liberal Democrats pledged to provide free personal care to older or disabled people at home and to raise carers' pay.
I've been a carer most of my life, carer for my mum when she was terminally ill then. My gran looked after me, and I looked after my nana when she was frail, and now I look after my disabled son with my wife. And so I sort of understand about how family carers are under pressure, because there are millions of families who are looking after their loved ones and they need more support.
But with the 2 main party leaders largely cooped up, practising lines for the debate, Nigel Farage has held the headlines for more than 24 hours, with just over 4 weeks to go to polling day.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Brilliant.
Well, the opinion polls in the last 24 hours are really going to dictate the stakes in this debate. For Keir Starmer, who only really wanted to do 2 of these, I think he'd happily have done none of them, it really is something to be endured and survived, because he'd be happy if the polls stayed more or less where they are. For Rishi Sunak, he's got to weaponise, exploit this moment. And one of the reasons he's got to do that is because you get a glimpse already today of how, if there isn't hope in the Tory party, discipline can completely break down. You heard in that report a Tory MP effectively kind of negotiating in public with Nigel Farage for a post-Tory route, post-general election alliance in the House of Commons. You could get a lot more of that sort of thing, even more disruptive and damaging to the Tory party, potentially, if they don't feel there is a flame still alight, a flicker of hope from tonight. Will anyone actually be watching? People might wonder. Here are two technocrats, as it were, sometimes described as that anyway, compared with Jeremy Corbyn versus Boris Johnson. That got 6 million viewers. There are expected to be millions of viewers. People, as you heard in that report again, who haven't really looked at both of these characters, particularly Keir Starmer, the newcomer, as it were, very closely. On the whole, though, even that non-technocrat battle in 2019 was a score draw, didn't really shift the dial, and it's got to be a possibility the same thing happens tonight.
Gary, thanks very much indeed. Well, it has been a big day for candidate selection for the main parties. Labour's National Executive Committee has been finalising its lists, hoping to put the controversies surrounding last week's Corbynist cull behind it. But there's been controversy about Conservative candidates too. Our senior political correspondent Paul McNamara is in Westminster for us now. Paul.
Yeah, selection is still a hot topic, but viewers might be a bit surprised about where most of the outrage is actually lying this evening. Among Labour former MPs now hoping to get re-elected, there's actually more resignation. The resentment and rage is actually reserved for the Conservative Party. So Labour have concluded their process today, effectively the rubber stamping. The dramas, we already sort of knew about them. So Diane Abbott, despite a week of bad headlines for the Labour leadership, she's been told now that she can stand, and she will stand as a Labour candidate. Faiza Shaheen, so that's the former candidate for Chingford and Woodford Green. Well, viewers would have heard last night an interview between her and the NEC about tweets which she says is the reason she was then deselected by the party. Well, before the NEC can make any ruling or any decision about her today, she got in there first. She resigned from the Labour Party. She says tomorrow she will be making a statement about her future. Angela Rayner was asked about this today. And remember, it was Angela Rayner last week who broke ranks saying that Diane Abbott should be allowed to stand. She was asked about it today, and what you got from her was actually a unified response.
Well, look, when Keir took over as leader of the Labour Party and I took over as deputy leader, we were very clear that we'd have high standards for our candidates. I'm not involved in that process. It's an NEC and a governance process, and they've carried out their process. And you know, I'm sorry that she feels that way, but you know, we're making no apology for making sure we have the highest standards of our candidates.
So much for Labour, Paul. Tell us about the anger on the Tory side.
Yeah, so the deadline for naming candidates is the end of the week, so we're getting a rush of them now. And what we're seeing is a few Tory candidates being named, and it's been met with a lot of anger. So, for example, you've got Rishi Sunak's former Deputy Chief of Staff, Will Tanner. He just won the plum seat of Bury St Edmunds. But there's a few other seats where you've got candidates who were MPs previously who have now been parachuted in. So take, for example, Dr. Kieran Mullen. Won Crewe and Nantwich in 2019. He then said, because of how boundary lines were redrawn and because of changes to his personal life, he couldn't stand there anymore. Well, he's now the candidate for Bexhill and Battle, where the Tory majority is 26,000. There's a couple of other seats like that. That has drawn outrage by other 2019ers who say, look, we thought we might lose our seats, but we're still sticking where we are. That's getting real anger. And this evening, I've spoken to one Conservative MP who said he's not just angry about all that, he's not just thinking about resigning the whip from the Tory party, he's seriously thinking about turning to reform. That would be as bad as the last 24 hours have been for the Prime Minister. That would throw rocket fuel on the situation.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's go back to the leaders' debate in Salford, and Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, joins us now from outside the venue. Good to have you back on the programme, Wes Streeting. So, as we just heard from Paul, the whole Diane Abbott business has been put to one side. We can move forward, you can move forward. are you now going to campaign for her in Hackney?
Well, I don't think Diane's going to need any help from me whatsoever. She's standing on a long record of service since 1987, but she certainly has my wholehearted support as a Labour candidate at this general election. And where we'll be focused on, obviously I'm campaigning for myself in my own constituency. I never take voters for granted, but I've been campaigning right across the country in the last week and a half in those crucial battleground seats where we need people to switch in England from the Conservatives to Labour. And of course, as we saw with the debate last night, a really strong campaign taking place north of the border in Scotland. Anas Sarwar's Scottish Labour Party making a really strong case to the people of Scotland that you can send SNP MPs to Westminster to oppose the Conservatives if you want, but far better to send Scottish Labour MPs to replace the Conservatives and offer the change the whole of the UK is crying out for. So that we're in good spirits in this election campaign. We're not taking anything for granted. We know that there is a demand for change in the air, and it's up to us to show we've got the answers to the challenges.
You certainly look in good spirits, Wes Streeting. I just wonder if we can home in on some of the details. We had a clip of Keir Starmer earlier saying that when it comes to migration policy, the Tories haven't got a clue, they've got it all wrong, and there are no specifics there. But actually, there are no specifics when it comes to your plan to bring down net migration either, are there? No targets, no numbers, no dates.
Well, hang on a second, because we are determined in our manifesto to make sure the promises we make are promises we can keep and promises that the country can afford. And where we've been on immigration and the immigration debate for some years now is government by gimmick, of setting out expectations and then letting people down. And I think that's fueling the crisis of trust in politics and politicians. And we've got to try and be the answer to that
So you're just being vague,
as well as the many other challenges.
You're just being vague about migration.
Take health and social care, for example. I think I can make a contribution, a serious contribution to bringing net migration figures down by making sure that we invest in the education, the skills, the training of our own homegrown workforce. We've got this appalling situation where we've got a shortage of staff in the NHS, yet we're turning away thousands of straight A students from studying medicine at our universities, at the same time as recruiting people from overseas in really high numbers and from countries on the WHO's red list, which have a serious shortage of their own. I think that's pretty unethical to those in terms of those countries. And I think it's unfair to students here at home.
Right, but
and I think in a balanced way, we can, yes, of course, make sure we draw on international talent, but crucially, we build our own homegrown workforce that helps to bring that net migration down in a serious and balanced and stable trajectory.
On so many issues, Wes Streeting, whether it's migration, whether it's defence, whether it's education, frankly, there's an awful lot of continuity between you and the incumbent lot. It's just that it's written with a very small c, and there's a new cast list of people and maybe a new tone, but essentially the kitty is empty and there's only so much you can do.
It's true to say that the public finances are in a terrible state, and I wish I could say I'll wave a Labour magic wand and that will change on the 5th of July as Keir Starmer walks into Downing Street and Rachel Reeves walks into the Treasury. Instead, what we're confronted with are hard choices, and I absolutely reject your notion that this is a choice between more of the same with the Conservatives or more of the same slightly better with Labour. That's your characterisation. I actually think 40,000 more appointments every week to bring down NHS waiting lists would be big change for the 7.5 million cases we've got on NHS waiting lists. If we've got primary school breakfast clubs in every primary school in the country and children are turning up with hungry minds instead of hungry bellies, that is a big change for people. If we've got 13,000 more police on our streets rebuilding neighbourhood policing and people feel safe in their communities, we can take better, more intelligence-led action on drug dealing and antisocial behaviour. That is real change in people's lives, and it's that real change that Labour offers. And of course we wish that we'll be able to do more, but the economy's in a state and the public finances are in a mess.
Thank you very much, Wes Streeting. I've sadly run out of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A little later, we'll speak to the Health Secretary. I hope to speak to the Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, speaking for the Conservatives. Now, major hospitals in London have declared a critical incident after a cyber attack led to operations being cancelled and patients being diverted elsewhere for their care. NHS officials said that they were working with the National Cybersecurity Centre after the attack on the lab service, which provides crucial information for 3 hospitals and GP services in South East London. Our health and social care editor, Victoria MacDonald, is outside St Thomas's Hospital in Lambeth. Victoria, tell us everything.
Yes, well, behind me is St Thomas's. That's one of the hospitals affected. Just out of sight is the Evelina Children's Hospital. Down the road at the Royal Brompton, where they carry out major transplants, King's College Hospital and Guy's, as well as primary care services across South East London. That's to give you a feel for just how significant the impact of this has been. A ransomware cyber attack. It happened on Monday, we're told, and it was on a company called Synovus, which provides the pathology services for all the areas I've just described. You know, some people, I just bumped into a doctor I know who said, well, let's talk about why you put all your pathology services into the hands of one company. Now it's them that has suffered it. They said the attack had affected all of the company's IT systems, which had resulted in interruptions to many pathology services. Now there are some reports that they're back to pen and paper, and that's certainly happened in other cyber attacks, and perhaps reaching maybe 10% of their normal levels. Now, one expert has said that healthcare services are particularly vulnerable, and that's because IT systems haven't been kept up to date, and many healthcare centres, also because they are hugely fragmented systems, they said, and they said the IT budget cuts. Now, the NHS does not pay ransom for ransom attacks, but suppliers sometimes do. We're also told that this will not be fixed within days, that it could be far longer than that.
Victoria, thanks very much indeed. OK, well, let's go to the Conservative view then, and the Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, who's in Manchester for the Leaders' Debate tonight. Victoria Atkins, good to have you back on the programme. So, this surprise election campaign of yours, how's it going? Is it going to plan?
Well, I think we have seen already in the first couple of weeks of this campaign that the demarcation between our plans as a Conservative Party for the future of our great country and contrasting that to the Labour Party, which they seem to think that they're the party of change, and yet I couldn't tell you a single policy that they are bringing in to conduct that change. And tonight's debate is really important because this is the first time, really, that we and the public are going to see these two leaders head to head. And of course, the choice on polling day is that stark. It's going to be Rishi Sunak or it's going to be Sir Keir Starmer. And I believe that we will see through Rishi's answers, through his ideas and through his energy that we have so much to offer the country in the coming years. And I very, very much look forward to hearing about that and to the, I hope, the public hearing it too.
What's not going according to plan, though, is the appearance of Nigel Farage as the head of reform and as a candidate in Clacton. Now, there are Tory MPs tonight who are begging reform candidates to stand down because they're afraid of losing their seats. I mean, this is a nightmare for you, isn't it? Nigel Farage back on the scene, breathing down your necks.
Well, of course, Mr Farage didn't locate Clacton on a map. He located it via a spreadsheet that his people had put together in order to try and help him understand who he could use in order to catapult himself into Parliament. But I think the British public understand that on polling day there is a choice between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. There are only two people who will be Prime Minister, who can be Prime Minister on the 5th of July.
Yes, but he can divide the vote on the right, can't he?
Leader.
He can divide the vote on the right.
That is the choice.
Right. Now,
that's
the other thing
choice
is
for voters, as in we think, if I may just on this, it's an important point. A vote for reform is a vote for the Labour Party. And so if you want to see higher taxes, higher immigration, if you want to see all of the things that we have gathered together and benefited from as we've left the European Union, if you want to see all of that, then you better start saving, because that will be a Labour government, courtesy of a vote for reform. If, however,
but
you want to see lower taxes, lower immigration,
isn't the problem with Nigel Farage? Sorry to interrupt. Isn't the problem with Nigel Farage that ultimately you've indulged him along the way, ever since 2010. You gave him the referendum on Brexit that he really wanted. Now that Brexit isn't really working out in terms of, money for the country, controlling our borders, or indeed the appreciation of the public, he's again come along and said, you're not doing it properly. You've created the Farage monster, and this man is now dancing on what many people and pollsters believe is going to be your grave.
So we are in the middle of a really important democratic exercise, our right to vote for the next government. And the referendum wasn't because we were trying to appease a particular individual. It was because we as a Conservative Party heard the frustrations that people had about the European Union.
He drove the agenda.
And we said to them in 2015, look, if you want a referendum, vote Conservative. And people did. And so we kept that promise of having that referendum. And we then said we will honour the result of that referendum, and we have done so. And so this isn't about an individual personality. This is about what we as Conservatives have done to listen to people and then to deliver on that democratic result that was that we arrived at in 2016. And from that, of course, we are seeing, for example, the huge expansion of the life sciences industry because of the unique position that we now find ourselves in. We find ourselves with a growing economy and all of the opportunities that this country has. This is what we have tried to create through our careful stewardship of the economy, some 800 jobs a day since 2010. And so that is the sort of thing that I think voters will be focusing on.